Atlantis, the Lost Continent, presented by Radio Canada International. This is the third program in a series of 4 on Atlantis, created, researched, and produced by Robert Zen. In this program, The Other Network, new evidence for an ancient civilization. At the end of our first program, we insisted that the 4 main paths followed by Atlantis seekers, the historical, scientific, mythological, and occult, must merge into one. Now we're going to look at evidence from a time when those viewpoints were fused into a monumental unity, a global network, and from sources as diverse as the dimensions of the pyramids to the legends of the Irish heroes will emerge the image of Atlantis herself as the center of a world that once was one. The first of our many guides is the world's foremost Atlantologist, Egerton Sykes.
When the library at Alexandria was burnt down by the Muslims on the grounds that no literature except the Quran was to exist, a large quantity of historical manuscripts of great importance were rescued by various Arab writers. Between them, they managed to extract the story, which has been published on various occasions, to the effect that before the Atlantis disaster, a king, Saluk of Egypt, not necessarily a pharaoh or an Egyptian, was informed by the court astrologer that a cosmic disaster of some nature menaced the earth, and that he should, for the preservation of the knowledge of the past, build 2 pyramids in which this knowledge would be secure against fire, water, or any other kind of disaster.
Now we'll look at those Arab sources in a little more detail.
First of those was a man called Abu Balk, who was writing in 870 A.D. and stated, quote, "The wise men previous to the flood, foreseeing an impending judgment from heaven, either by submersion or by fire, which would destroy every created thing, built upon the tops of a plateau in Upper Egypt pyramids of stone in order to have some refuge against the approaching calamity. 2 of these, the first and the second, exceeded the rest in height, being 400 cubits high and as much in breadth and length. They were put together so well that the joints of large blocks of stone were scarcely perceptible." The next Arab source is Masudi, who died about 943 A.D., and was the author of Akbar el-Zaman Numad, the fields of gold, mines of gems, from which the following is extracted. Surid ben Shaluk ben Sermuni ben Termidium ben Tedresan ben Sal, one of the kings of Egypt before the flood, built 2 great pyramids. The reason for building the pyramids was that the king, who lived 300 years before the flood, once dreamt that the earth was twisted round, the stars fell from the sky and clashed together with a great noise, and that all mankind took refuge in terror. Later he gathered his interpreters of dreams and asked them what his dream meant. They did their best, as accurately as possible, and told that a great flood would come and afterwards a fire from the destruction of the constellation Leo, burning up all the world. The king said, "Look, if this disaster is going to befall our country, what shall we do?" They said, "Yes, the flood will befall most of the country." Then he said, "Look, if it will flourish again, or will it remain inundated?" They answered, "No, our country will again be as it was and flourish."
Then, in the words of Egerton Sykes,
the king ordered the pyramids to be built and the Nile to be led into certain canals and be filled with talismans, wonders, treasures, and idols, and with the mummies of kings. And in accordance with the king's order, the soothsayers recorded all that the wise men had said. On the walls and ceilings of the pyramids, all the secret sciences in Egypt were recorded, and pictures of the starry sky were painted thereupon, and the means of curing harmful things, and all they knew of arithmetic and geometry understandable to anybody who knew the language and its writing. When the building of the pyramids was about to begin, he had huge columns and stone flags carved and granite fetched up from Aswan.
But as you'd expect, the secrets built into these monuments were well protected.
Masudi also referred to the automata placed as guardians of the pyramids. That of the Great Pyramid was an idol of speckled granite, standing upright with a spear in his hand and a serpent around his brow. This serpent garroted anybody who violated the precincts and then returned to its former place. The guardian of the Second Pyramid was a man carved from black and white onyx, seated upon a throne and armed with a spear. On an intruder's approaching, there was a sudden noise, and the image destroyed him. That of the Third Pyramid placed a magic spell upon unwanted visitors, which eventually destroyed them. Nevertheless, some explorers managed to penetrate into the enclosures, and Masudi tells of one such group. The walls were composed of small, square stones of beautiful colors. A member of the party who extracted one of these and placed it in his mouth was overcome with sudden pain in his ears until he had replaced it. Having proceeded further, they found another quadrangle with the image of a cock made of precious stones and standing on a pedestal. When they entered, its eyes lit up and it crowed and flapped its wings. Finally, they came upon the image of a goddess of white stone with a covering on her head and with a lioness on each side. On seeing this, they took fright and fled. The Arab writer was Maturdi, who told about an expedition to explore the well of the Great Pyramid, so that after having negotiated the first and second stages, they proceeded until they came to a narrow passage in which there were large numbers of bats, and down which a current of air was felt. One of their number proceeded along this, when the walls suddenly closed in and cut him off from the party. The others ran away, and in getting out of the edifice, several died. When on the surface they were discussing the matter, when their companion reappeared and spoke to them in an unknown tongue. Masudi tells a similar story, but adds that the last man could only say, "Suck, suck, sucker, sucker," after which he fell down and died.
This information has been available in print for over a century. I am not the only person who has recorded it. And yet, to the best of my knowledge, not a single one of the parties which have been interested in exploring the Great Pyramid within the last 20 years had any knowledge of it, or would have been interested in it had they been told. And what is more, they confirmed the time given by Plato to a very large extent. And Plato and these people had nothing in common at all.
The Arab confirmation of Plato's dates for the destruction of Atlantis has important implications. What we seem to be learning is that our history stretches much farther back than where the timid Santorini estimates placed Atlantis, a mere 1,500 years ago.
A century ago, or very nearly, when Ignatius Donnelly was writing about Atlantis, our knowledge of the past went back at the most 2,500 years. That was about as far as we knew anything at all. Nowadays, practically every archaeological team of any importance in the world is turning up material of 8,000, 9,000 years ago. And I feel that within a very short time we should be getting artifacts dating back to BC 10,000, which was the time of Atlantis and which were contemporary with it. It still appears that the main body of information, for what it is worth, which may even contain the legendary Book of Thoth, to which we get references, is still hidden somewhere underneath either the first or the second pyramid. And I say definitely underneath, because they stand on a rock foundation which is about 50 meters above the level of the Nile, and there is ample room for subterranean chambers of any kind. So far, none of the explorers have been able to find anything, but it's certainly there. There are too many stories from the Arabs, who after all were the best informed on Egyptian history, about this, for us to be able to overlook them and deny them.
And there are still other sources. One of the American psychic Edgar Cayce's most intriguing prophecies is that the records of Atlantis will be found near the Sphinx, which he says is itself a bizarre representation of the form of Atlantean man.
I think this is rather improbable. The reasons are the following. The Sphinx is a god of an alien civilization. It came from Assyria, from Babylonia, or somewhere in that direction, during one of their invasions of Egypt. It is not a female goddess, but a male god, representing a man head on the body of a lion, rather resembling the Assyrian statuary which you find in most great museums at the present moment. The other thing is this, that to go below the level of the Sphinx temple, you would be below the level of the Nile, and I think your chambers would be flooded out. And as it was an alien culture, I very much doubt whether there would have been any connection whatsoever between the Temple of the Sphinx and the pyramids standing on the plateau immediately above. That there may be an entrance somewhere near the Sphinx is probable. The rock face at the moment is very, very broken. There have been many disturbances in the last couple of thousand years, and it will take an enormous amount of work before we manage to finally find a proper entrance. As for the pyramids themselves, anybody who has ever looked at a picture of the Great Pyramid realizes that well underneath it there is a chamber which was discovered by Weiss and Perring about 1850, which is a dead end. Perhaps there we shall discover what Weiss and Perring were unable to find a century ago, that is, the secrets of lost Atlantis as recorded by the Egyptians, and of which both Solon and Plato had knowledge.
As well as stretching our historical perspective, perhaps even leading us to Plato's cyclical view of history, the present-day search for lost civilizations is gradually exposing again a whole network connecting the sites of antiquity. There are startling comparisons between the pyramids of Egypt and the ziggurats of Mexico, though at first glance there seem to be anomalies. Here's Princess Marta de Ruspoli adroitly scaling a huge side of the problem.
Well, you see, what has upset the study and the comparison is that the chronology is so different. The South American pyramids, I mean the Mexican pyramids, are much less ancient than the Egyptian ones. But, you see, there we have the mystery of the Olmecs again. The Olmecs who arrived probably from a sunken Cyclopean city and started building Cyclopean walls. Well, they worked especially in a place called Monte Alban, that is, when they left the plains, which were very unhealthy. And there have been diggings in Monte Alban recently. Well, they discovered that the pyramids fitted other pyramids, and that when a pyramid was old and that they wanted to make another pyramid, they made it on top of the old pyramid, covering the old pyramid up like a box that fitted very, very close. Well, some of them have 2, 3, 4 pyramids in each other. Well, they had the idea to open a passage into the basis of a big pyramid of Monte Alban. And they came to the huge pyramid, which was the primitive pyramid, which was completely buried and went way down into the earth, and was made with huge blocks of stone. Again, the stone builders, you see, the Olmecs with their huge stones, which are practically the same size as the stones of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Well, that pyramid, which they now have, they've uncovered a few yards of this pyramid inside the other pyramids, and it goes right into the earth. This pyramid is very much more ancient, so that little by little one may be able to trace a chronology. But if it's true that the Olmecs brought that, and that they came from the Bahama Islands, where there was a Cyclopean city, maybe there were huge pyramids that are under the Atlantic now.
So this means that it is possible that they will discover contemporary pyramids with the Egyptian pyramids, which means that if they didn't transport them from Egypt, the Olmecs, then they both came from the same culture.
They probably came from the same culture, and there were probably pyramids in Atlantis.
Culture is worldwide. It always has been. It has spread from one side of the Atlantic to the other. And in the particular case of the pyramids, it may be taken as absolutely certain that the source of pyramid building was in the Atlantean continent itself, and that the idea spread to both sides. The fact that there were slight differences in the methods of construction is neither here nor there. But pyramids, and like a lot of other things, spread east and west from the center of the Atlantic, and not across it, and they were not conceived spontaneously on both sides at the same time, as some people hope.
Far from being spontaneous creations, the pyramids are steadily revealing themselves as the ciphers for a whole cosmic geometry. The relationship of the pyramid's height to the perimeter of its base is the same as that between the radius and circumference of a circle, and it is probable that the expanding squares of the successive pyramids were intended to represent a series of concentric rings. The whole scheme formed a model of the mystical city, in terms of which the philosophers of the ancient world were accustomed to express their cosmology. An example of this figure can be found in Plato's description of Atlantis, as well as in biblical versions of Ezekiel and St. John the Divine. The traditional units of land measurement, many of which are still in use today, have survived practically unaltered for several thousand years. They have, it appears, two principal origins. Some, like the inch, foot, yard, and mile, are sacred units, representing some important fraction of the Earth's ideal or formal dimensions. These units formed the language of cosmology and were used to express the geometrical structure of the universe. Others originated as geodetic or scientific earth-measuring units. Of these, the acre is a notable example, for it represents 1 millionth of the square on the Earth's polar axis. Even today, the error is scarcely more than 1 inch in the side, 208.7 feet long, of an acre set out as a square. The geodetic acre and the formal yard obviously represent different systems, for although they are related by the characteristic pyramid number 4840, which is the number of the square yards in an acre, the side or circumference of an acre, whether it is expressed as a square or as a circle, in no case consists of a whole number of yards, feet, or inches.
The existence of these units, and of others all over the world, also of geodetic origin, provides indisputable evidence of a former scientific civilization, to which Plato referred in his account of Atlantis. Histories relating to the former world were preserved in the archives of Egyptian temples, and even today there may still be some in existence elsewhere. The oral tradition was inherited by the scholars of classical Greece and passed down an unbroken line of initiates at least as far as medieval times. But it was the sacred or formal branch of ancient cosmology that survived, rather than the exact science which had produced units such as the acre and digit.
This view of a scheme of sacred engineering belongs to John Michell, a Cambridge scholar whose book The View Over Atlantis describes the landmarks of a forgotten country, the landscape of the Golden Age. John Michell spoke with us at his home in Bath, England.
As to the physical evidence for Atlantis, it does seem that there have been developed universal civilizations in the past. The evidence points to that. The evidence of ancient monuments, the universal discovery of units of measure, the universal themes of myth and sacred history, and the traces of universal science and philosophy, which are found all over the world. Most convincing, I think, on the physical level, is the discovery of an identical system of units of measure from Japan to Britain and America. The ancients had units of measure which were based on both the human body and on astronomical distances. The Egyptian, the Greek, and indeed the present British units of measure are related to each other and indicate advanced knowledge of the dimensions of the solar system existing in remote antiquity, because these units are based on significant multiples of such astronomical distances as the Earth's circumference and diameter and those of the Moon and Sun. We find all over the world that ancient monuments, stone monuments, although locally differing, are arranged on similar principles. They appear to be arranged in relation to the natural currents of the Earth in some way, as affected by astronomical considerations. That is, we find wherever there's ancient temples on all continents, that they are arranged in a certain way in relation to the landscape and in relation to astronomical events. And these everywhere are expressed in the nature of the god to which the temple is dedicated. So we find in Britain stone circles and alignments of stones in ancient sites, some of which have since become Christian sites, arranged in a scientific manner relating to natural phenomena, to the landscape, and to the heavenly bodies.
All over the surface of the Earth are found traces of a gigantic work of prehistoric engineering whose meaning has never been explained. Despite their great size and the precise nature of their construction, it has generally been assumed that the monumental ruins of antiquity were built for some indefinable purpose connected with ritual and superstition. Yet the latest evidence indicates that this was by no means the case. The pyramids of Egypt, Stonehenge, the enigmatic structures of earth and stone that stand in lines all around the world were the instruments of a highly evolved system of natural science, once of universal application. Some forgotten principle involving the act of alchemical fusion between the forces of solar radiation and the terrestrial current determined both their proportions and their geographical location for all prehistoric structures were sited and laid out according to a single scheme and for an identical purpose, conceived in and radiating from Atlantis. From a study of these monuments and of the magic science of their builders, certain conclusions have been reached, which accord to a remarkable extent with the insights obtained by mystics and time travelers, and also with the evidence of mythology, folklore, and the occult tradition. It appears from the assembled evidence that we are now approaching some imminent revelation from the lost world of Atlantis, the effects of which will be truly revolutionary.
My name is Christopher Mark Buxton, and I'm a sociologist by trade, and an amateur researcher into antiquity and into the lost knowledge which is spread so much over the continents of the world. It seems that throughout the world there are many manifestations of an old knowledge which we do not understand. Is it possible that it came from one particular source? In each of the continents, the pattern of development of these buildings, of these structures, is of a different nature. In England we have the standing stones, stone circles, stone alignments. In Europe also we have several stone circles, the best one being at Karnak in Brittany. In Egypt we have the pyramids, which are built on an ideal part of the land, built on a delta which is in itself like an inverted pyramid. In Peru we have huge markings over the countryside. And in USA, mounds, small stone circles, and serpent hills. Anthony Roberts wrote a complete book called Atlantean Traditions in Great Britain, in which he traced this knowledge all over England, Wales, and Scotland, and showed how it was manifested in the mythology of the different parts of the country. How each stone circle had its own legend, how each of these legends appeared to tie up all the way through, how in many cases the stone circle had 4 different stories attached to it, and each of these stone circles would have the same stories. So it seems that one isn't really dealing with different tribes building different monuments. One is dealing with a travelling knowledge, a spreading wisdom, which enabled each of the people, each of the tribes in the area, to build circles, monuments, with a complete understanding of what they were doing.
The ancients built better than we knew. It's confirmed from yet another quarter by Dr. Manson Valentine, not far from the famous underwater Bimini ruins he discovered in 1969.
Well, since some of these very large stones are propped up by smaller ones, they resemble, superficially at least, the dolmens that the ancient people, yes, the megalithic dolmens which occur on the coast of Brittany and Ireland and other places in the Mediterranean area. They also occur in the Amazon Valley.
Have you seen them in the Amazon Valley?
Yes, I've seen dolmens in the Andes that similar to these we're talking about, and I've of course seen pictures of others that are absolutely enormous and are in the not in the jungle area, but in the savanna land north of the Amazon. I'm sure that metaphysics enters into this a great deal, because the ancient people know a great deal about it, and these were symbolic workings. It was a plan, actually. I think what we have out here is a rhythmic, some sort of a rhythmic plan of creation that is represented in these great stones.
Could you explain that a little bit further, Doctor?
No, it's impossible really to delve into the minds of the ancients. They worked in their own way, and we think we can explain them, but we cannot. And I've been doing enough work in these various areas, especially in the caves, to be absolutely certain that they were in command of forces that we don't understand and we've lost.
But the pattern of those subtle forces is starting to glimmer more and more brightly just beneath the surface of our inquiries. As well as discoveries in England, there have been important revelations from the Soviet Union. Christopher Bird, co-author of The Secret Life of Plants, has distilled the Russians' dramatic research.
The main thrust of the article, based on studies made by the three collaborators of data taken from fields as widely separated as archaeology, geochemistry, ornithology, and meteorology, was the suggestion that the Earth projects from within itself to the surface a dual geometrically regularized grid. The first part of this grid forms 12 pentagonal slabs over the sphere, from which evidence the research triumvirate suggested that the first shape of the Earth had just such an outline. In other words, it was a dodecahedron. While this allegation may seem fantastic at the outset, the idea of the Earth as a geometric shape goes back in history at least to the Pythagorean school of thinking in ancient Greece. Its famous adherent, Plato, wrote that the Earth, viewed from above, resembles a ball sewn from 12 pieces of skin. The first intriguing characteristic found by the Russians was that the ribs of their dual grid coincide with mid-oceanic ridges, core faults, and zones of active risings and depressions on the ocean floors. If one looks at vertices of the triangles, one finds one of them in the region near Florida at, or very near, the center of the much-heralded Devil's Bermuda Triangle, recently celebrated for the mysterious disappearance of ships and planes. The Russians also mention that Ivan Sanderson, the professional biologist who founded the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained in Columbia, New Jersey, has written that the triangle is not the only infamous region on the Earth's surface, but that there are 9 others. The 10 regions, says Sanderson, are symmetrically situated around the globe, 5 above, 5 below, at equal distances from the equator. Had the American investigator thought to add 2 more points, at the North and South Poles, say the Russians, his scheme would have precisely coincided with the model which they have adopted. Another characteristic which caught the attention of the threesome was that of the coincidence of the various edges of their polygons with the junctures of slabs or plates which many scientists credit with being the regions where volcanic and seismic activity proliferate. Checking magnetic maps, the Russians also found that the centers of all world magnetic anomalies overlap with the vertices of the polygons in their grid. They point out that in crystals, the most interesting events take place at the nodes and edges of the crystal lattice. If their hypothesis is correct, as they allege, just such a structural lattice may run through our planet to determine events occurring on its surface.
Atlantology has long been a prestigious and flourishing enterprise in the Soviet Union, where more than 4 times as many publications are produced annually on the subject than in the West. The doyen of Soviet Atlantologists was a Dr. N.T. Zhirov, who described his discipline in this way.
The task of scientific Atlantology is first and foremost to deduce hard facts from historical sources and myths, including the Plato legend, and find corroboration of these facts and considerations in the data obtained from different fields of science. On a larger scale, Atlantology seeks to establish the relationship between the possibility of large land areas, and even continents, having existed and been destroyed, and the problem of human settlement and development. It may be said that at its present stage, Atlantology is going through a transitional period of development, a period characterized by its formation into a science and departure from fantasy and pseudo-scientific fabrications. Pseudo-atlantological works include the numerous books published abroad in the past few decades on the subject, Atlantis, Golden Age of Mankind. This literature is permeated with a mystical, idealistic spirit and has nothing in common with a scientific approach to the problem. I should like to note that the interference of the Atlantomaniacs has greatly harmed science, for it discredited the Atlantis problem in the eyes of many scientists.
I've got a book written by the Russians who were on the Lamont expedition.
Right.
and they claim that there is geological evidence to indicate that there was a freshwater island continent landmass between America and Europe about 12,000 years ago. How would this tie in with your theories?
Exactly parallel. Precisely the same. It would be an Atlantean uplift, yes. There are valleys there that indicate rivers that flowed from east to west down an Atlantean continental mass.
That's what he discovered. Yes, he got freshwater mollusks and
yes,
other evidence. One final question, Dr. Valentine. Sorry to have taken so much of your time.
That's a pleasure.
But do you believe then that these structures did form part of Atlantis, or would they have been part of an out island, or what?
Well, I think so. These are just outlying areas, and it could be that they are extremely old. I believe that Atlantis existed through the entire Tertiary, and during the Pleistocene it was broken up by successive cataclysms. The first one, which ushered in the Pleistocene from the Pliocene, was the most severe, and evidently there was a complete flip of the Earth. The poles just changed places, terrific devastation, and after that the three subsequent ones broke it up.
So Atlantis can be seen as the submerged matrix of a vast planetary grid, making itself felt on both sides of the Atlantic. Here's James Sturziker, an author and founder of the International Order of Kabbalists in London.
There is, around the whole coast of the Atlantic, various names that could be related to this particular continent. We have, for instance, the Atlas Mountains. There is a race of people called the Atlans. And there were, round about South America, a race of people that we referred to as the Atlantes. Then we have other coincidences which are pointed out in Donnelly's book. A pipe with a particular type of carving was found in South America, with the same type of carving as a pipe in Ireland. Could this be coincidence? From Plato's Critias, we learn that the Atlanteans built houses of white, black, and red stone. Whitish, calcareous terrain, black and red volcanic rocks are found on the Azores. And if we accept the soundings that have been made by various expeditions from time to time, we find that the islands of the Azores are mountain tips, presumably from some sunken continent. In dealing with the problem of Atlantis, we must take into account the continental drift theory of Professor Alfred Wegener, which postulates that 225 million years ago, all continents were united. The profile of the Americas and the geographical contours of Europe and Africa do indeed fit like a jigsaw puzzle. The Swedish vessel Albatross, sound in the bed of equatorial Atlantic, discovered traces of fresh water plants at the depth of 2 miles. Professor Hans Petersen, who led the expedition, thought that an island must have sunk at that spot. Scientists working for Lamont Geological Observatory in the USA have made an important discovery on the basis of foraminifera, tiny sea animals, that a sudden warming of surface ocean waters took place in the Atlantic 10,000 years ago.
Yet another corroboration of Plato's chronology for Atlantis. Now, let's go back to the matrix of mythology and Egerton Sykes.
Now, one of the other sources which I have been found extremely useful is that of the Irish. There were three races who were mainly concerned with Ireland in its early stages: the Tuatha De Danann, the Firbolgs, who probably came from the Volga River, and the Fomors or Pomorza, who came from the Baltic and Scandinavia. The Tuatha were the ones who provided most of the folklore which has come down to us through the hands of translators and poets. And one of the stories which has been most helpful to me has been the story of the four cities. And here, if I may quote, "There are four cities that no mortal eye has seen, but the soul knows. These are Gorias, that is in the east, and Phineas, that is in the south, and Murias, that is in the west, and Phalias is in the north. And the symbol of Phalias is the stone of death, which is crowned with pale fire. And the symbol of Gorias is the dividing sword, and the symbol of Phineas is a spear. And the symbol of Murias is a hollow that is filled with water and fading light." Well, this information has been again available for centuries. But it suddenly occurred to me 3 or 4 years ago that in these four names I probably had the names of 4 of the outlying cities of the old Atlantean civilization, memories of which had come down to the Irish through the Tuatha, who, to my mind, had probably been either temple soldiers or temple guardians at the time. So, after a lot of research work, we came to the conclusion that Murias was the equivalent of Bimini and was centered round there, that Phalias was in the Azores, or off the 2 eastern Azores islands, that Gorias was what we now know as Madeira, and Phineas what we now know as Tenerife in the Canary Islands. And it must not be forgotten, they were all islands. None of these cities were on mainland at all. Every one of them was on an island. And we have so many records of their being visited by strange travelers, such as Bran O'Connor and Mael June, such as Loki the Norwegian, such as the Turin brothers, that we are obliged to assume that there were strange things of this nature. Strange things in that they were unknown to the people who arrived there, not that they were that mysterious, which give us a clue which takes us back to the past. Now, the interesting thing is this. We have one artifact from Atlantis, my mind, which is at present moment in London and is visible. This is the symbol of Phalias, the stone of death crowned with pale fire. This was originally, to my mind, a radioactive stone which was kept as a sacred object, much as is the sacred stone of Mecca. Gradually, over the years, the radioactivity wore off, and instead of becoming a sacred object of worship, it became used as a throne. It was brought from the Azores, where it was, to Ireland in the time of the Tuatha, probably by the Turin brothers. It became the throne of Tara, on which the Irish kings were crowned. Later it was captured and taken to Scotland, where it became the throne of St. Columba. Later again it became the stone of Scone, on which the Scottish kings were crowned, and finally it was captured by the English in battle, taken to Westminster Abbey, installed on the throne of England, and on it every English sovereign for the last 400 years has been crowned king or queen. Obviously, from this means that the radioactivity is no longer dangerous. But apparently, in the Irish times, it was said to be extremely dangerous and to cause cries of terror on the part of people who were forcibly seated on it. The spear and the lance, sword, these are all right. They came from various metal foundries on the islands off the African coast. They are important, but not vital. What is really important is the symbol of Murias, which was the hollow that was filled with water and fading light. Well, the earliest explorers of America, such as Ponce de Leon, came over and landed at Miami, which they thought was Bimini, on the grounds that there was the fountain of eternal youth, which had been the secret, one presumes, of the temple of Murias. Well, Ponce de Leon was mistaken. The fountain of eternal youth, wherever it was, has now vanished. But nevertheless, the tradition that on the other side of the Atlantic lay a means of healing and of restoring one's youth persisted throughout the whole of history, from the times of the Vikings, the earliest Vikings, the Aesir and the Vanir, right up to the time when the Europeans discovered America. To my mind, this succession of clues, which I'm still working on, provides me with one of the steps between the existence of Atlantis and our present-day culture. And as I said before, I'm absolutely certain that the coronation stone in London, the Stone of Destiny, the Liar Fail, is itself an artifact dating back as far as Atlantis, and is probably the only one in the world of which that can be said.
What is the basis for identifying these four cities with the four islands, Phaeacious, Corea, Timea, and Mirias, with Azores, Madeira, Tenerife, and Bimini?
There are only 4 places along the Atlantic which could possibly have been the sites of these cities and which carry in them legends of this past period. For example, both Gorias, which is Madeira, and Phineas, which is Tenerife, have traditions of the past of metal working, of the manufacture of swords and weapons. And actually on Tenerife there was a magnificent statue of Poseidon in a chariot with 2 horses, or even 4, in solid gold, which stood in the temple.
Just as artifacts in the Old and the New World are being linked to Atlantis, so too are even the deities of 2 civilizations. Here finally is Princess Ruspoli with one of these links, and with a tantalizing clue to what may have brought on the destruction of the lost continent.
There is a strange resemblance between Horus, the founder of Egypt, the son of Osiris, and Quetzalcoatl in Mexico. Horus is represented as a man. His shoulders, his chest is the chest and shoulders of a man, and in all his statues he is naked to the waist, and he has the head of a hawk, and he wears a veil over his face. Well, the Tuaregs wear veils over their faces, and they have very sharp profiles, very much like hawks. One would think when one sees them that they are hawk-headed. It may be the legend of Horus. Well, Horus had lost an eye in his battle with Set. This eye had been torn out. His whole face was probably torn out by the tearing out of this eye. And he veiled his face because of this eye, in all probability. Well, strangely enough, there is a description of Quetzalcoatl in a book which was written at the time of Cortés in Mexico, that is, the time of Montezuma. A Jesuit named Fray Diego Duran, and a very intelligent man, accompanied Cortés. And this Jesuit visited the sanctuaries, and wrote descriptions that are remarkably accurate, and he made little hand paintings of the sanctuaries that he visited. He describes Quetzalcoatl in this way. He says, he has the body of a man, naked shoulders, and his chest, he is naked to the waist. And he has the head of a hawk. He has a queer deformation on the side of his face and nose, like a wound. Fray Diego Duran describes it. He says that there are certain eagles, condors, in South America who have a kind of scar above their beak, like a disease. And he says that Quetzalcoatl's beak is like that, his hawk's beak. And he wears a veil over his face, a black veil over his face, like the black veil of Horus. And he has a pointed and very high mitre on his head, like Horus, who wears the white crown of Upper Egypt. Besides, Quetzalcoatl is represented in the painting of Fray Diego Duran, which is a painting which dates to the 16th century. He paints all around Quetzalcoatl seagulls, as if he was connected with the sea. Besides, according to all the Mexican traditions, Quetzalcoatl came like a comet from the sky. As a matter of fact, he probably landed, and he's certainly very ancient. The tree of Quetzalcoatl, which is near Montalban, between Montalban and Mictlan, is one of the largest and oldest trees in the world.
But if we suppose that Horus came from Atlantis to Egypt, then how can we also suppose that Horus went west and settled in America?
Because it's the legend of Horus that came. People came who brought the remembrance of Horus, the legend of Horus. That's why they said that he was a comet that came from the sky. It's the legend that came.
Do you think this was the comet which activated the volcanoes?
Well...
and destroyed Atlantis?
I have no idea. It's not in my competence to research a thing like that, but it should be gone into. Every little detail should be examined carefully.
So Quetzalcoatl was the comet?
Quetzalcoatl came as a comet.
In our final program, we'll look at the catastrophe theories. including Velikovsky's Collisions of Worlds, and at the question, do we live on Atlantis? In this program, you heard Dr. Manson Valentine, Edgerton Sykes, James Thurziger, Princess Marta de Ruspoli, John Michel, and Mark Burton. Our series on Atlantis was created and produced by Robert Zend, with co-production by Tim Wilson and Len Shear for Radio Canada International.